Sorry, sir. Your meal is sold out.
Sir, that meal is not for you. The words landed so sharply that even the ice in the crystal glasses seemed to stop moving. Rebecca Collins stood in the aisle of Skyworld Airlines Flight 281, one hand gripping a silver meal tray, the other resting against her navy uniform skirt. Her smile was small, controlled, polite enough for company training, cruel enough for everyone nearby to understand. Marcus Bennett looked up from seat 1A. He did not blink. He wore faded dark jeans, a soft gray hoodie, and white sneakers that had clearly walked more sidewalks than red carpets. His black canvas backpack sat beneath the footrest. No designer luggage, no gold watch, no entourage. Nothing about him announced money, and that, Rebecca had decided, was the problem. Around them, the first-class cabin glowed with warm amber light. 12 wide leather seats curved like private rooms. Champagne rested in tall flutes. Silverware clicked softly against porcelain. Outside the oval windows, Los Angeles had disappeared beneath clouds, and the aircraft climbed east toward New York. Inside, the air had turned cold. Marcus glanced at the tray in Rebecca's hand. On it sat a perfectly plated filet mignon, dark seared edges shining under truffle butter, with roasted potatoes arranged beside it like something from a downtown steakhouse. I ordered the steak, Marcus said. His voice was quiet, not weak, quiet. Rebecca tilted her head. Her blonde hair was pinned tight at the back of her neck, not a strand out of place. She had worked premium cabins for almost 30 years, and she had learned how to make disrespect sound like procedure. I understand what you selected, sir, she said, but we are experiencing limited availability tonight. I can offer you the chicken instead. It may be more comfortable for you. The word comfortable hung there. Not suitable, not available, comfortable. Across the aisle, Daniel Brooks, a heavy-set real estate developer in a navy suit, paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. His own steak had already been cut open, pink and tender. Beside him, his wife lifted her wine glass and looked away the way people do when they see something wrong, but do not want it to become their problem. A few rows back, someone stopped typing. A phone camera shifted. Marcus looked around the cabin slowly. Every other passenger in first class had been served the steak. Every plate was white porcelain. Every glass was crystal. Every napkin was folded linen, except his. Rebecca's smile sharpened. Would you like the chicken, sir? Marcus looked back at her. For a brief second, something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, not fear, recognition. This was not new to him. He had seen that look in hotel lobbies, in private clubs, in boardrooms where people assumed he was someone's driver until he sat at the head of the table. He had learned long ago that some people did not need facts. They needed only a face, a hoodie, a pair of worn shoes, and the story wrote itself in their minds. Still, he kept his voice even. I paid for first class, he said. I selected the steak when I booked. I would like the meal I ordered. Rebecca lowered the tray just enough for him to smell the butter. Then she pulled it back. I am responsible for maintaining service standards in this cabin, she said. Not every passenger understands how premium dining works. We try to match the experience to each guest. A faint sound came from the galley. Emily Parker, a young flight attendant with soft brown eyes and a nervous grip on a coffee pot, stood frozen near the curtain. She had heard every word. Her lips parted as if she meant to speak, then closed again. Rebecca did not turn around. Emily, she said without looking, please continue beverage service in economy. Emily swallowed. But Rebecca, she said softly, I checked the warmer. We still have extra steak meals. The cabin went still. Rebecca's head turned just slightly. It was not much, but it was enough to make Emily's shoulders tense. Emily, Rebecca said, each syllable clean and hard, economy beverage service. Now, the younger woman's face flushed. She looked at Marcus, then at the other passengers. Shame crossed her face before she lowered her eyes and stepped back through the curtain. Marcus watched her go. He did not blame her. People with power often teach silence to those who need a paycheck. Emily was 27, still new enough to believe company values meant something. but experienced enough to know that challenging Rebecca Collins could end a career before it had fully begun. Rebecca placed a covered dish on Marcus's tray table. Chicken. No apology. No explanation beyond a lie. The scent of steak still filled the air around him. "Enjoy your meal, sir," she said. Then she turned and walked away, her shoes tapping softly down the aisle like a verdict. Marcus did not touch the plate. He simply sat back, folded his hands, and looked out the window as the aircraft broke through a layer of cloud. Sunlight flashed across his face, calm, still, almost unreadable. But under the surface, he was recording everything, not with a phone, with memory, the exact words, the tone, the witnesses, the service pattern, the fear in Emily's face, the silence of those who knew better. Across the aisle, Chloe Adams, a freelance journalist with hundreds of thousands of followers, kept her phone low against her scarf. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She had boarded this flight expecting to gather notes for a story about luxury travel after the pandemic. Instead, she had found something older, uglier, more American, bias wrapped in a uniform, discrimination served with a smile. Her camera caught Rebecca leaning toward Daniel Brooks and laughing warmly as she offered him more wine. It caught the untouched chicken in front of Marcus. It caught Marcus's expression. That was what made Chloe keep filming. He was not performing outrage. He was not begging. He was not trying to prove he belonged. He already knew he did. And that quiet certainty made the insult feel even worse. What Rebecca Collins did not know was that Marcus Bennett had not boarded Flight 281 as an ordinary passenger. He had boarded it as a test. 72 hours earlier, Aurora Aviation Group had completed its acquisition of Skyworld Airlines for $4.1 billion. The deal had been quiet. Legal teams knew. Senior executives knew. A few board members knew. The cabin crew did not. The passengers did not. Rebecca certainly did not. The man she had just humiliated in Seat 1A was the founder and chief executive officer of Aurora Aviation Group. He was the new owner of Skyworld Airlines. And he had chosen this flight deliberately. No security detail, no announcement, no special treatment. He wanted to see the airline as a customer would see it. He wanted the truth before the company had time to polish itself for him. He had expected outdated systems, maybe inconsistent service, maybe tired equipment, and poor communication between departments. He had not expected to be denied a meal because a senior employee looked at his skin, his clothes, and decided he did not deserve dignity. Marcus reached for the old leather notebook in his backpack. It had belonged to his father, a bus mechanic from Chicago who used to tell him, "Son, power is not how loud you speak. Power is what you do when the room expects you to disappear." Marcus opened the notebook. He wrote one line: first-class service failure, possible discrimination, employee Rebecca Collins. Then he paused. The plane hummed around him. Crystal glasses chimed. Somewhere behind the curtain, Emily was probably fighting back tears. Rebecca was still smiling for the passengers she believed mattered. Marcus looked at the chicken cooling in front of him. Then he wrote a second line. This is not a meal problem. This is a culture problem. Rebecca Collins had already decided the story she would tell if anyone complained. Difficult passenger, confusion over meal inventory, miscommunication. In her mind, the situation was handled. That was the danger of people who lived too long inside small authority. They stopped seeing human beings. They only saw categories. Acceptable, unacceptable, worth the effort, not worth the effort. She moved through the cabin with smooth professional grace, refilling wine glasses and laughing softly at businessmen who tipped their heads back too loudly after their second bourbon. Every movement looked polished, experienced, safe. But Emily Parker could not stop shaking. Inside the galley, she gripped the counter while the aircraft rattled lightly through turbulence over Arizona. Metal coffee pots clinked against each other. The warmers hummed. Her breathing sounded too loud in her own ears. She looked at the remaining steak meals. 3 left. Rebecca had lied directly to a passenger. No, not just lied. Targeted him. Emily had worked enough flights to recognize the pattern. She had seen certain passengers ignored longer, Seen assumptions made faster. Seen smiles disappear depending on who sat in the seat. Usually she told herself it was accidental. Stress, timing, miscommunication. Tonight felt different. Tonight felt deliberate. Behind her, the curtain suddenly opened. Rebecca stepped inside. "You have a problem following instructions?" she asked quietly. Emily turned too fast. "No, Mom." Rebecca folded her arms, then stopped staring at the food inventory like it's a murder scene. Emily swallowed hard. "He ordered the steak," she said carefully. Rebecca's expression did not change. "And now he has chicken." "That's not really the issue." Rebecca took one slow step closer. "You're young," she said. "So let me teach you something about premium cabins. Service isn't just about what people pay for. It's about maintaining an atmosphere." Emily frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means certain passengers affect the experience of others." There it was. Not loud, not open, but clear. Emily stared at her. Rebecca lowered her voice further. "You think those executives out there spend thousands of dollars to sit next to someone who looks like he wandered in from a bus station?" The words hit harder than Emily expected. Not because they were shocking, because Rebecca truly believed them. Emily glanced through the small opening in the curtain towards seat 1A. Marcus sat quietly by the window, writing in an old notebook, while untouched chicken cooled beside him. He did not look angry. That somehow made it worse. Rebecca noticed Emily looking. "Trust me," she said. "Passengers like him complain constantly. If you survive long enough in this job, you'll learn how to manage people before they become problems." Emily felt heat rise into her face. "He hasn't done anything wrong." Rebecca's eyes hardened. "That attitude will keep you in economy service forever." Then she turned and walked back into first class. Emily stood frozen. For a moment, she thought about reporting it immediately. Skyworld had policies, ethics hotlines, anti-discrimination training videos every quarter, posters in employee hallways talking about dignity and inclusion. But she also knew how airlines worked. Managers protected senior staff. Senior staff protected the company, and young employees learned when to stay quiet, especially if they needed health insurance, especially if they still had student loans. The plane shifted again through rough air. A seatbelt sign chimed overhead. In first class, Marcus closed the notebook slowly. Across from him, Daniel Brooks finally leaned over. "Hell of a situation," he muttered. Marcus looked at him calmly. "Seems that way." Daniel loosened his tie. He looked uncomfortable now, like a man realizing too late he had laughed at the wrong joke. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you should gotten the steak." Marcus gave a faint nod. "I appreciate that." But Daniel looked away quickly after saying it. Support delivered softly, safely. The kind people offer when they want moral credit without personal risk. 2 rows back, Chloe Adams continued filming discreetly beneath a folded magazine. Her live stream audience had exploded. Comments poured across the screen. "This is disgusting. Why is nobody stopping her?" "That flight attendant knows exactly what she's doing." Chloe kept watching Marcus carefully. People reacted differently to humiliation. Some became loud, some defensive, some desperate to prove themselves. Marcus did none of that. He remained controlled. That control fascinated her. A woman sitting beside Chloe leaned over. "Are you recording this?" Chloe lowered the phone slightly. "Just documenting. She could lose her job." Chloe looked toward Marcus. "And he lost what exactly?" she asked softly. "Dignity, respect, equal treatment?" The older woman had no answer. Near the cockpit, Rebecca picked up the cabin phone and pressed a button. "Captain," she said, "I may need you aware of a passenger issue in first class." Captain Andrew Mercer's voice crackled back through static. "What kind of issue?" Rebecca glanced toward Marcus before answering. "Potential non-compliance. I'm monitoring it." Marcus heard every word. So did half the cabin. Daniel Brooks sat upright. "Non-compliance?" "The guy hasn't even raised his voice." Rebecca smiled tightly. "Sir, I'm trained to recognize escalating behavior before it becomes disruptive." Marcus slowly turned his head toward her. The cabin became very quiet. "You believe I'm escalating?" he asked. Rebecca crossed her arms. I believe some passengers become confrontational when service limitations are explained. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then he asked the question she least expected. How long have you worked for Skyworld? Rebecca blinked once. 28 years. And in 28 years, Marcus said calmly, you still think dignity should be selective. Her jaw tightened instantly. You don't know anything about me. Marcus held her gaze. No, he said softly. I know exactly enough. The words unsettled her more than shouting would have. Because for the first time that night, Rebecca felt something shifting beneath her control. Passengers were watching differently now. Not casually, carefully. Dr. Ethan Miller removed his glasses and leaned into the aisle slightly. Mom, he said, voice measured and older, I've been flying first class since before you started this career, and I've never seen a passenger treated this way for no reason. Rebecca forced a smile. Sir, I assure you there are details you may not be aware of. What details? Ethan asked immediately. Rebecca hesitated, only half a second, but people noticed. Marcus noticed most of all. Powerful people understood silence. They knew when truth should exist and suddenly did not. Rebecca recovered quickly. I'm not discussing internal service matters publicly, but the damage was done. Passengers were no longer seeing Marcus as the problem. They were beginning to see Rebecca, and Rebecca felt it. Her posture stiffened, her movement sharpened, every smile became thinner. Inside, panic had started whispering, because deep down, she knew this was no longer about a meal. It was about exposure, the kind that ruins reputations. Back in the galley, Emily stared at the employee tablet mounted beside the beverage cart. Passenger manifest, seat 1A, Marcus Bennett. She almost looked away, almost. Then she tapped the name. The screen loaded slowly beneath the aircraft Wi-Fi. A profile appeared, corporate travel account, executive clearance tags. Special handling restrictions disabled by direct authorization. Emily frowned. That was unusual, very unusual. Her pulse quickened. She opened another screen, then another, and suddenly the blood drained from her face. A corporate memo appeared from 72 hours earlier. Aurora Aviation Group acquisition finalized. Transition Oversight Authority assigned to CEO Marcus Bennett effective immediately. Emily stopped breathing for a second. Her eyes lifted slowly toward the cabin, toward the quiet man beside the window, the man Rebecca Collins had publicly humiliated over a steak dinner. The owner of the airline sat alone in seat 1, while his own employee denied him basic respect, and Rebecca still had no idea. Emily looked back at the screen again just to make sure she was not hallucinating, but the words remained there. Marcus Bennett, Chief Executive Officer. Skyworld Airlines Ownership Transition Authority active. A chill moved through her chest, not because Rebecca was about to lose her job, because Emily suddenly understood something much bigger. If this could happen to a billionaire in first class, what happened every day to people with no power at all? Emily's hands trembled so badly she almost dropped the tablet. The aircraft lights reflected across the screen while the words burned into her vision. Marcus Bennett, Chief Executive Officer, Aurora Aviation Group, owner of Skyworld Airlines. For a moment, the sounds around her faded. The engines, the clinking glasses, the muffled conversations from first class, everything blurred beneath the pounding in her chest. Rebecca was still out there smiling at passengers, still pretending she controlled the room. Emily looked through the galley curtain again. Marcus sat exactly the same way he had before, calm, straight-backed, one hand resting near the notebook that now lay closed beside his untouched meal. No arrogance, no performance, no sign that he planned to humiliate anyone. That frightened Emily more than anger would have, because men who truly held power usually did not need to announce it. Behind her, another flight attendant whispered, "You okay?" Emily turned sharply. It was Kevin Morales, a senior cabin attendant in his 40s, kind face, tired eyes, the kind of employee who has spent years surviving corporate politics by learning when not to speak. Emily lowered her voice. "Do you know who seat 1A is?" Kevin glanced toward the cabin casually. "Some business traveler?" No, Emily swallowed. He owns the airline. Kevin laughed once. Then he saw her expression. The laughter vanished immediately. You serious? Emily turned the tablet toward him. Kevin read the screen. His face lost color. Oh my God. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then Kevin exhaled slowly through his nose. Rebecca's dead. Emily shook her head instantly. That's not even the worst part. Kevin looked confused. Emily's voice softened. If she treated him like this that easily. Imagine what happens to regular passengers every day. That landed harder. Kevin looked away because he knew. Everyone in the industry knew. Not always openly, not always intentionally, but they knew. Certain passengers got patience. Others got suspicion. Some people were called sir before they even sat down. Others had to prove they belonged before receiving basic courtesy. Kevin rubbed his forehead. You need to stay out of this. Emily stared at him. How? Because corporate investigations destroy everybody around them. She lied about him. I know. She implied he was dangerous. I know. She denied him service because of how he looked. Kevin's voice dropped lower. And if this blows up publicly, the company lawyers will protect themselves first. Not you. Not Rebecca. Nobody. Emily looked toward Marcus again. He was staring quietly out the window now. Moonlight stretched across the side of his face, calm, distant, almost sad. That expression stayed with her. Not angry. Disappointed. Like a man watching the same wound reopen after spending years hoping the world had changed. In first class, Rebecca continued serving drinks, but her confidence had started cracking beneath the surface. Passengers were no longer relaxing around her. Conversations stopped when she approached. Eyes followed her movements. People who had ignored Marcus earlier were now watching him carefully. Even Daniel Brooks seemed uncomfortable in his own seat. Finally, he cleared his throat. Sir, he said quietly to Marcus, you handled that better than most people would. Marcus turned slightly. Getting angry rarely changes people. Daniel nodded awkwardly. Still, what she did wasn't right. Marcus studied him for a moment. You said nothing when it happened. Daniel looked down immediately. That silence answered everything. Marcus did not say it cruelly, just honestly, and honesty often cut deeper. Across the aisle, Chloe Adams kept filming discreetly. Her live stream had crossed almost 200,000 viewers. News blogs had started reposting clips already. Comments flooded the screen faster than she could read them. Some demanded Rebecca be fired immediately. Others defended her. Maybe there was more to the story. Maybe the passenger provoked her. Maybe people are too sensitive now. Chloe had covered public scandals long enough to recognize the pattern. Americans love fairness in theory. But when fairness became inconvenient, people searched desperately for reasons to justify discomfort. She's lowered the phone slightly and watched Marcus again. No matter how tense the cabin became, he stayed measured. That kind of control usually came from experience. Pain repeated enough times to become discipline. Near the cockpit, Rebecca picked up the service phone again. Captain Mercer, she said softly. The passenger in 1A continues creating tension in the cabin. Marcus heard that too. So did everyone nearby. This time, Dr. Ethan Miller leaned forward immediately. That's ridiculous. Rebecca turned toward him with a strained smile. Sir, I'm trained to identify disruptions before escalation occurs. You keep saying escalation, Ethan replied. The only person escalating anything here is you. A few passengers murmured agreement. Rebecca's face tightened. For the first time all evening, control slipped visibly from her posture. Ladies and gentlemen, she said sharply, I would appreciate cooperation while I manage cabin operations. Marcus finally spoke again, quietly. What exactly are you managing? Rebecca looked at him. The air changed. Cold, still, dangerous. Deny me the meal I paid for, Marcus continued. You implied I do not belong here. You suggested I may be a security concern without cause. And now you're attempting to frame the reaction to your behavior as the actual problem. Nobody moved. Rebecca opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. You're twisting this situation. Marcus nodded once. That's usually what people say when their behavior becomes visible. The words hit like a slap. Daniel Brooks stared at the floor. Chloe's live stream exploded again. In the galley, Kevin whispered, Jesus Christ. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears because the entire cabin had shifted now. This was no longer one passenger against a flight attendant. It had become something larger, a public examination of power. Who received dignity automatically? Who had to earn it? Who got believed? Who got labeled dangerous? Rebecca sensed it too, and fear finally entered her eyes. Not guilt. Fear of losing status, fear of losing authority, fear that the carefully managed image she built over decades might collapse in a single flight. She walked quickly into the galley and pulled the curtain shut harder than necessary.
What did you tell passengers?
She demanded. Emily stared at her. Nothing. Rebecca stepped closer. People are turning against me. Kevin spoke carefully. Rebecca, maybe we should de-escalate this. I am handling it. No, Emily said softly before she could stop herself. You're making it worse. Rebecca's eyes snapped toward her.
What did you say?
Emily swallowed hard. Every instinct told her to back down, but another feeling pushed harder now. Shame. The shame of watching something wrong happen and helping it continue through silence. You treated him unfairly, Emily said quietly, and everybody saw it. Rebecca stared at her in disbelief. You think this job is about feelings? She snapped. This is first class. Standards matter. Emily's voice trembled slightly. Respect should be the standard. Silence. Kevin closed his eyes briefly like a man witnessing a car crash seconds before impact. Rebecca stepped forward slowly. You have no idea how this industry works. No, Emily replied. I think I finally do. Rebecca laughed once. Short, cold. Then she noticed the employee tablet still glowing in Emily's hand. Her eyes narrowed.
What are you looking at?
Emily hesitated. Too long. Rebecca grabbed the tablet. Her face changed instantly. The blood drained from it so fast, Kevin actually took a step backward. She read the screen once. Then again. Marcus Bennett, Chief Executive Officer. Ownership authority active. Rebecca stopped breathing for half a second. Outside the galley curtain, first class remained calm and quiet. Inside, Rebecca Collins felt her entire world beginning to collapse. And for the first time that night, she understood something terrifying. The man she tried to diminish did not need to prove he belonged in first class. He owned the sky they were flying through. Rebecca Collins kept staring at the tablet as if the words might rearrange themselves into something safer. But they did not change. Marcus Bennett, Chief Executive Officer. Aurora Aviation Group. Her throat tightened. A thin buzzing sound filled her ears. For the first time in almost 30 years of flying premium cabins, Rebecca felt completely unsteady. Kevin watched her carefully. Rebecca. She did not answer. Emily stood frozen beside the beverage cart, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Outside the galley curtain, the cabin remained quiet. Too quiet. The engines droned steadily beneath the floor. Ice shifted inside crystal glasses. Someone coughed softly near row 2. But underneath those ordinary sounds sat tension so heavy it felt physical. Rebecca finally looked up. You told him? She whispered. Emily shook her head immediately. No. Rebecca searched her face, desperate to find a lie. There was none. That somehow made everything worse. Because Marcus had endured the entire humiliation without revealing who he was, without threatening anyone, without using power, without trying to embarrass her. Rebecca suddenly remembered every second of the flight in painful detail. The way he calmly repeated his meal request, the way he never raised his voice, the way he watched her with disappointment instead of rage. And for one horrifying moment, Rebecca understood exactly how she looked through his eyes. Not strong, not professional, not sophisticated, small. A woman using borrowed authority to decide who deserved dignity. Kevin lowered his voice carefully. You need to fix this now. Rebecca blinked.
Fix what?
Kevin stared at her in disbelief. Everything. She straightened slightly, instinctively reaching for control again. I follow service discretion. No, Emily said quietly. You profiled him. Rebecca snapped toward her. Watch your mouth. Emily flinched but held her ground. You denied him service everyone else received. There were operational limitations. There are still steak meals in the warmer. Rebecca's face hardened instantly. For a second, nobody spoke. Then she whispered something dangerous. "You have no idea how many difficult passengers I've dealt with," Emily answered softly. "And how many of them looked like him?" That question cut clean through the room. Rebecca inhaled sharply. Kevin closed his eyes briefly, because now the truth sat openly between them. No more corporate language, no more polished excuses, just bias, raw and visible. Rebecca looked down at the tablet again, then toward the curtain. Fear crept across her face. What if he reports this publicly? Emily almost laughed at the question. "What do you mean, if?" Rebecca frowned. Emily reached slowly into her apron pocket and showed her the live stream on Chloe Adams's phone feed. Almost 500,000 people were watching. Clips was already spreading across social media platforms. News accounts had reposted screenshots. Legal commentators were discussing airlines' discrimination policies in real time. Rebecca stared at the screen in horror. One clip replayed repeatedly. Her voice. "Not every passenger understands how premium dining works." The comments underneath were brutal. "She should be fired. This happens all the time." That man stayed calmer than most people would. Rebecca's breathing became shallow. "This is insane," she whispered. "No," Emily said.
This is visible.
Rebecca looked at her sharply. Then came the knock from the cockpit door. Captain Andrew Mercer stepped into the galley, tall and silver-haired, still carrying the confidence of a man used to instant respect. But the second he saw Rebecca's face, his expression shifted.
What happened?
Rebecca handed him the tablet silently. He scanned the screen. His jaw tightened immediately. Oh, God. Nobody spoke. The captain looked toward the curtain where Marcus sat, then back at Rebecca. "You told me he might be a security concern." Rebecca swallowed hard. You thought what?" Her composure cracked for the first time. "I thought he was becoming confrontational." Captain Mercer stared at her. He never raised his voice. Rebecca said nothing. The captain rubbed his forehead slowly. He had spent 32 years flying commercial aircraft. He knew lawsuits, knew media cycles, knew exactly how fast public outrage could destroy a company. But beneath all those calculations sat another realization. Rebecca had been wrong. Not technically wrong, morally wrong. And now the entire country was watching it happen live. "What exactly did you say to him?" the captain asked quietly. Rebecca hesitated. That hesitation answered enough. Captain Mercer exhaled heavily and looked at Emily.
Tell me.
Emily spoke carefully, repeating the entire interaction exactly as it happened. No exaggeration, no emotion, just facts. The stake denial, the comments about premium standards, the implication Marcus did not belong, the security accusation. Each sentence made the captain's face darker. When she finished, silence filled the galley again. Finally, he asked one question. "Why?" Rebecca looked stunned. "I already explained the service issue." "No." His voice sharpened. "Why him?" Rebecca opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Because there was no answer she could survive saying aloud. Captain Mercer looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "I've flown with you for 12 years. Rebecca nodded faintly. "And I ignored things I should have questioned." That hit harder than yelling would have. He looked exhausted suddenly, older, like a man realizing too late that professionalism without courage becomes complicity. In first class, Marcus remained still near the window while passengers whispered around him. Daniel Brooks leaned closer again.
You knew this would happen?
Marcus kept his eyes on the clouds outside. "No," he said softly. "I hoped it wouldn't." Daniel studied him carefully. "Then why stay quiet?" Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "Because people reveal themselves when they think you have no power." Daniel looked away after that. Across the aisle, Chloe lowered her phone briefly.
You okay?
She asked Marcus quietly. He gave a small nod, but Chloe noticed something most people missed. Fatigue, not physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. The kind carried by people forced to remain composed through disrespect because they know anger will only confirm someone else's stereotype. Chloe had interviewed politicians, activists, celebrities, veterans. She recognized controlled pain when she saw it. "What she did," Chloe said carefully, "it's bigger than one flight. Marcus looked at her. Yes, he replied. That's the problem. Back in the galley, Rebecca's panic was turning into desperation. What happens now? She asked. Captain Mercer answered honestly. I don't know. That terrified her most, because people like Rebecca survive by understanding systems, policies, hierarchies, reputation. She always knew where power sat in a room.
Tonight,
She had misjudged completely, and now the ground beneath her career was disappearing. The captain straightened his jacket slowly. I'm speaking with him. Rebecca grabbed his arm lightly. Andrew, please. He looked down at her hand, then at her face, and gently removed it. You should treated him with dignity before knowing who he was. The words crushed her because they were true. Not corporate true, human true. Captain Mercer stepped through the curtain into first class. Conversation stopped instantly. He walked towards seat one a while. Every passenger watched. Marcus looked up calmly as the captain approached. For a brief second, neither man spoke. Then Captain Mercer said the words Rebecca should have said an hour earlier. Mr. Bennett, I owe you an apology. Marcus studied him quietly. Not triumphant, not smug, just tired. The captain continued carefully. What occurred tonight does not reflect the standards we claim to uphold. Marcus glanced around the cabin. That depends, he said softly. Was tonight unusual? Nobody in first class moved, because suddenly everyone was asking themselves the same question, not whether this happened, how often. The question stayed in the air longer than the captain expected. Was tonight unusual? Captain Mercer stood beside seat 1A, with both hands resting at his sides, his uniform pressed, his shoulders squared, but his eyes no longer had the certainty they carried when he first left the cockpit. He looked like a man who had opened a door in his own house and found a room he never wanted to admit existed. Marcus Bennett waited. He did not help him. He did not soften the moment. Some questions were meant to be uncomfortable. Across the aisle, Chloe Adams held her phone steady. Her fingers were stiff from gripping it for so long. The live stream had grown beyond anything she had ever seen. Comments flashed so fast they looked like rain on glass. Older viewers wrote about hotels, restaurants, banks, first-class cabins, country clubs, places where they had paid, belonged, and still been treated like guests in someone else's life. The story was no longer about one meal. It had become a mirror. Captain Mercer looked toward the galley curtain, then back at Marcus. I can't honestly say it was unusual, he said. The cabin went silent. Rebecca heard it from behind the curtain. Her hand tightened around the counter. Emily closed her eyes for half a second, not out of relief, out of grief. Because the truth had finally been spoken, and truth always arrived, carrying everything people had buried beneath procedure. Marcus nodded once. Then the apology needs to be bigger than me. Captain Mercer swallowed. I understand. No, Marcus said softly. I don't think you do yet. The captain's face tightened, but he did not interrupt. Marcus leaned forward slightly. His voice remained calm, but every passenger felt the weight inside it. If I were only Marcus Bennett in a hoodie, without money, without ownership, without cameras watching, what would have happened next? No one answered, because everyone knew. He would have been labeled difficult. He would have been reported. He might have been removed at the gate after landing. Rebecca's version would have gone into the file. His complaint would have been reviewed by people trained to protect the brand, and the world would have moved on. Marcus looked toward Daniel Brooks. Daniel's eyes dropped. He looked toward Dr. Ethan Miller, who sat with his hands folded, jaw tight. He looked toward Chloe, whose camera was still capturing every breath. Then he looked back at Captain Mercer. That is the problem, Marcus said. Not one rude employee. A system that believes certain people only deserve justice when someone powerful is watching. The captain's throat moved. He had no defense. In the galley, Rebecca stepped toward the curtain. Kevin tried to stop her with a small shake of his head, but she ignored him. She pushed into first class. Her face was pale, but her posture tried to rack for authority. It did not work. Authority, once exposed as arrogance, rarely returns clean. Mr. Bennett, she said, voice thin, I would like to apologize for any misunderstanding. Marcus did not move, Emily appeared behind her, eyes wide. The word misunderstanding had landed badly. Everyone felt it. Dr. Ethan Miller spoke first. His voice was steady, but there was anger beneath it. Miss Collins, a misunderstanding is when someone hears a drink order wrong. This was not that. Rebecca turned toward him quickly. Doctor, with respect, you did not see everything. Chloe lowered her phone just slightly. Actually, a lot of us did. Rebecca's eyes flicked to the camera. Panic moved across her face again. Marcus finally stood. Not fast, not dramatically. He rose with the careful steadiness of a man who knew the room was already his without needing to seize it. Rebecca took one step back. The cabin seemed smaller with him standing. He was not taller than everyone, not physically imposing, but something in his stillness made people straighten. He carried the quiet pressure of real command. Miss Collins, he said, I do not want a performance. Rebecca blinked. I want honesty. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Marcus continued, you did not know who I was when you denied me the same service everyone else received. That is what makes this important. Not embarrassing for you. Important. Rebecca's eyes glistened, but the tears looked more like fear than remorse. I have served this airline for almost 30 years, she said. I have given my life to this job. Marcus nodded slowly. And during those years, how many passengers did you teach to feel small? The sentence struck the cabin like a gavel. Rebecca flinched. Emily's breath caught. Daniel Brooks looked as if he had been hit too, though the words were not aimed at him. Because that was the part people rarely discussed. Discrimination did not always shout. Sometimes it adjusted tone, delayed service, questioned tickets twice, used policy like a curtain, made a person shrink quietly, then called that shrinking cooperation. Rebecca's lips trembled. I never meant to hurt anyone. Marcus's voice softened, and somehow that made it harder. Intent does not erase impact. For the first time, Rebecca looked at the chicken plate still sitting on Marcus's tray table. Cold now, untouched. A small insult that had become evidence of something much larger. Her shoulders lowered. I thought I was protecting the cabin experience, she whispered. Emily stepped forward.
From what?
She asked. Rebecca turned. Emily's face was pale, but she did not back away. From people who do not look rich enough? From people who dress differently? From people you decide might not belong? Rebecca stared at her former trainee. The words hurt because Emily had once admired her. That kind of disappointment is different. It carries history. Kevin stood in the galley doorway, watching silently. His face had the tired sadness of someone who had stayed quiet too many times and was now seeing the bill come due. Captain Mercer looked at Marcus. What do you want us to do right now? Marcus turned to him. Secure the facts, he said. Preserve the service logs. Preserve the meal inventory records. Preserve communication with the cockpit. No editing. No cleaning up reports after landing. The captain nodded. Second, Marcus said, Miss Collins is relieved from passenger service for the remainder of this flight. Rebecca looked up sharply.
You can't just.
Then she stopped. Because he could. Everyone knew now. Marcus did not raise his voice. Third, Emily Parker will document what occurred from the crew perspective. Not as an accusation, as a witness statement. Emily froze. Sir, I don't know if I'm allowed. Marcus looked at her with a gentleness that surprised her. You are allowed to tell the truth. Those words almost broke her. Her eyes filled, but she nodded. Yes, sir. Chloe's live stream erupted again. But inside the cabin, the moment felt strangely quiet. Less like revenge. More like a wound finally being cleaned. Painful, necessary, long overdue. Daniel Brooks unbuckled his seatbelt and stood awkwardly. His wife touched his arm, but he stepped into the aisle anyway. Mr. Bennett, he said, voice rough. I need to say this in front of everyone. I saw what was happening and I stayed comfortable because it benefited me. Marcus watched him. Daniel swallowed. That was cowardly. I'm sorry. Marcus did not smile, but his face softened slightly. Thank you, he said. Now remember how this felt the next time silence is easier. Daniel nodded, eyes wet. Across the cabin, Dr. Ethan Miller stood too. I'll provide a written statement, he said, for whatever investigation follows. I watched your behavior from the beginning. You were calm, respectful, The concern was never safety. Olivia Reed, the attorney seated near the window, raised her hand slightly. I'll do the same. And for the record, retaliation against Ms. Parker for reporting this would create serious legal exposure. Emily looked toward her, startled. Olivia gave a small nod. You are not alone, young lady. That was when Emily finally cried, not loudly. Just one tear at first, slipping down the side of her face as the plane hummed through the dark over the Midwest. She wiped it quickly, embarrassed. But Chloe's camera caught the moment anyway. So did thousands of people watching from living rooms, nursing homes, airport lounges, and quiet kitchens across America. For many of them, that tear was familiar. The tear of someone choosing truth over safety. Rebecca stood apart from everyone now, small in the aisle she once controlled. Marcus looked at her one last time. You thought power meant deciding who deserved respect. He said, you were wrong. Power is making sure no one has to earn it. No one spoke after that. The aircraft continued toward New York, steady and silver beneath the night sky. But inside Skyworld Flight 281, something had already landed. Accountability. Rebecca Collins sat alone in the jump seat near the rear galley, while the rest of the cabin moved forward without her. That was the part she could not process. The flight was continuing. Service was continuing. Passengers were talking again. But she had been removed from the rhythm of it. After nearly 3 decades in the air, she suddenly felt like a stranger inside her own uniform. The overhead lights cast pale shadows across her face. Her makeup had begun to crack near the corners of her eyes. Her hands rested tightly together in her lap, fingers locked hard enough to turn white. Kevin stood nearby, pretending to organize beverage supplies, giving her distance while still keeping watch. Nobody trusted her alone right now, not because she was dangerous, because panic makes people unpredictable. Rebecca stared at the floor. In her mind, she kept replaying the moment Marcus stood up. Not his words, his calm. That calm had destroyed her more thoroughly than rage ever could. If he had shouted, she could have defended herself, called him aggressive, emotional, threatening. Instead, he remained measured while she unraveled in front of the entire country. She looked up suddenly. How many people are watching now? Kevin hesitated, then answered honestly. Over 1 million. Rebecca closed her eyes. 1 million people. She imagined neighbors seeing the clips, former co-workers, her ex-husband in Arizona, her daughter in Seattle who barely spoke to her anymore. Every uncomfortable conversation she had ever avoided, now rushing back toward her at once. Kevin finally spoke quietly. You should probably call union representation before we land. Rebecca laughed weakly. Do you think a union can save me from this? Kevin had no answer. Up in first class, Emily moved carefully through the aisle with fresh coffee service. Her hand still trembled slightly, but passengers looked at her differently now, not as background staff, as someone who had chosen courage when silence would have been safer. Dr. Ethan Miller accepted his coffee with both hands and gave her a gentle nod. You did the right thing. Emily managed a faint smile. I almost didn't. That's usually how you know it matters. Those words stayed with her. A few rows away, Olivia Reed typed steadily into her tablet. Legal notes, timestamps, witness observations. She had spent 20 years litigating corporate misconduct cases, and tonight felt painfully familiar, not because discrimination shocked her anymore, because organizations always acted surprised after ignoring warning signs for years. She looked toward Marcus. He had finally accepted a fresh meal after Emily insisted personally. The replacement steak sat untouched for now. He seemed more focused on the people around him than the food itself. Olivia leaned slightly toward him. You understand this becomes bigger after landing. Marcus nodded. I know. The Department of Transportation may open a review. Civil rights groups too. I know. She studied him carefully. Most executives would already be calling crisis management teams. Marcus looked out the window at the darkness beyond the wing. That's because most executives care more about stock prices than trust. Olivia paused, then quietly asked, And you? Marcus took a slow breath before answering. My mother cleaned hotel rooms for 20 years, he said softly. Do you know what she taught me? Olivia waited. She said the fastest way to see someone's character is to watch how they treat people they think cannot fight back. His eyes remained on the clouds below. I bought this airline because I believe transportation matters. Airports, flights, hotels. Those places decide who feels welcome in society and who feels tolerated. Olivia listened carefully. Marcus continued. If people only received dignity after revealing wealth or status, then dignity was never real to begin with. Across the cabin, Daniel Brooks sat unusually quiet. His wife touched his arm.
You okay?
Daniel nodded automatically, but he was not okay, because Marcus's words had unsettled something old inside him. Daniel grew up poor in Kentucky before building a real estate empire in Texas. For years, he told himself success had erased humiliation, but tonight reminded him how quickly powerful people still protected comfort over fairness. He remembered the exact moment Rebecca denied the steak. He had seen it immediately, seen the disrespect, seen the assumption, and done nothing. That sat heavily in his chest now, not because social media might judge him, because he had judged himself first. Near the front of the cabin, Captain Mercer stepped out from the cockpit after another call with operations control. His face looked older than it had 3 hours earlier. He walked directly to Marcus. Corporate headquarters is aware, he said quietly. Marcus nodded once. And they're preparing statements already. A faint disappointment crossed Marcus's face. Of course they are. The captain lowered his voice further. Public relations teams want language emphasizing isolated employee misconduct. Marcus looked up at him immediately. Was it isolated? Captain Mercer hesitated. That hesitation answered enough. Marcus folded his hands slowly. Then don't let them hide behind one employee. The captain exhaled heavily. You understand what that means financially. Marcus looked almost tired hearing the question. Andrew, if a company can afford luxury lounges and executive bonuses, it can afford accountability. The captain looked down briefly. For years, he had convinced himself professionalism was neutrality. Stay calm. Follow procedures. Avoid conflict. Tonight, he was beginning to understand neutrality often protected the wrong people. Back in the rear galley, Rebecca finally stood. Kevin looked up carefully. Where are you going? I need to speak with him. Kevin shook his head immediately. That's a bad idea. I need to explain myself. You already did. Rebecca's eyes flashed with frustration. You think I'm some racist monster now? Kevin answered carefully. I think you stopped seeing people individually a long time ago. That hurt, because deep down she knew it was true. Years of premium cabins had changed her slowly, quietly, passenger after passenger. Wealth became normal. Entitlement became expected. Eventually, she stopped asking who deserved kindness and started asking who fit the image of importance. And somewhere along the way, empathy became conditional. Rebecca swallowed hard. My father worked construction his entire life, she whispered suddenly. We barely had money growing up. Kevin looked surprised. Rebecca stared at the floor. The first time I served first class, I promised myself I would never feel invisible again. Kevin's expression softened slightly. Then she added quietly, I think I started making other people invisible instead. That silence afterward felt honest, not performative, not defensive, just painful. Kevin finally spoke. You should tell him that. Rebecca nodded slowly, but when she reached the first-class curtain, she stopped moving. Marcus was speaking softly with Emily near seat 1A. Emily looked emotional again, though calmer now. Marcus handed her his father's old notebook. Read the first page, he said. Emily opened it carefully. Handwritten words filled the paper in faded ink. Never let success convince you that you are better than someone else, and never let humiliation convince you that you are less. Emily looked up slowly. Marcus smiled faintly. My father wrote that before I ever made $1. Rebecca stood frozen behind the curtain listening. Something inside her finally cracked completely. Not her career, not her reputation, her certainty. For years, she believed professionalism meant maintaining standards. Now she was beginning to realize real professionalism might simply mean remembering every passenger carried a full human life invisible to the eye. Marcus sensed movement and looked toward the curtain. Their eyes met. Rebecca expected anger. Instead, she saw exhaustion that somehow hurt even more. She stepped forward carefully. "Mr. Bennett," she said quietly, "I owe you the truth." The cabin became still again. Rebecca took a shaky breath. "I did judge you the moment you boarded." No one interrupted. "I looked at your clothes, your bag, your skin, and I made assumptions before you ever spoke." Her voice trembled. "I told myself it was instinct, experience, standards, but it wasn't." She swallowed hard. It was prejudice wrapped in professionalism. Even Chloe lowered her phone slightly hearing that, because genuine admissions are rare, especially from people losing everything. Rebecca looked directly at Marcus. "I cannot undo what I did tonight, but I am sorry." Marcus held her gaze for a long moment. Then he asked quietly, "Are you sorry because I own the airline?" Rebecca's eyes filled instantly. That was the real question, the only one that mattered. And the entire cabin waited for her answer. Rebecca could not answer immediately. The engines roared softly beneath the cabin floor while thousands of feet below, dark farmland drifted across the American Midwest like shadows under moonlight. Inside first class, every face remained fixed on her. She looked suddenly older than she had at boarding, not because of fear, because truth ages people fast. Her lips trembled once before she finally spoke. At first, she whispered, "Yes." No one moved. Rebecca lowered her eyes. "At first I was terrified because you owned the airline, because I knew my career was over." She swallowed hard. "But somewhere between the galley and this conversation, I realized something worse." Marcus watched her quietly. Rebecca looked up again, eyes wet now. "I would have gone home tonight believing I was the victim." That sentence hit the cabin differently. Not dramatic, not polished, honest. She took a shaky breath. "I would have told myself passengers are too sensitive now. That social media destroys people over misunderstandings. That I was being attacked unfairly." Emily stood frozen near the beverage cart. Rebecca turned toward her, and I would have taught younger employees the same thing. Silence. Rebecca's voice weakened. "That's the part I can't stop thinking about." Marcus leaned back slowly into his seat. For the first time that night, some of the steel left his expression. Not forgiveness, recognition. Because people rarely changed you through humiliation alone. They changed when denial finally became impossible. Chloe Adams lowered her phone another inch. The live stream audience was still exploding online, but even the comments had slowed. Millions of strangers were listening now, with the same uneasy attention filling the cabin. Rebecca looked directly at Marcus. "I don't know how to fix what's broken in me," she admitted quietly, "but I know pretending it isn't there almost destroyed someone tonight." Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then he asked softly,
Do you know why this matters so much to me?
Rebecca shook her head. Marcus glanced toward the window before answering. "When I was 12 years old, my mother took me to a department store in Chicago." His voice stayed calm, but something deeper moved beneath it now. "She had saved money for months to buy me a winter coat." The cabin remained silent. Marcus continued. "A salesman followed us through every aisle, never directly accusing us of anything, just watching, staying close enough to remind us we didn't belong." Rebecca closed her eyes briefly. Marcus looked down at his hands. "My mother still bought the coat." She smiled the entire time. A faint sadness crossed his face. "But when we got back to the car, she cried before starting the engine." Emily felt her throat tighten. "She told me something that night I never forgot," Marcus said. "She said dignity is exhausting when people make you prove you deserve it every day." No one spoke. Even Rebecca stood perfectly still now. Marcus looked back at her. "You denied me a steak dinner tonight." But what hurt was the message underneath it. Rebecca whispered, "You don't belong here." Marcus nodded once. Yes. The words settled heavily across the cabin, because everyone understood now this was never really about food. The steak had simply exposed something older and uglier woven quietly into society. Captain Mercer leaned against the aisle seat nearby, listening carefully. He thought about all the years he had praised employees for maintaining premium standards without ever asking what those standards actually meant in practice. He thought about complaints dismissed as isolated incidents, training sessions rushed through like paperwork, quiet biases mistaken for professionalism. For the first time in his career, he realized systems do not fail accidentally.
People protect them.
Daniel Brooks suddenly cleared his throat. My father used to say something, he murmured. He said prejudice survives because decent people convince themselves small moments don't matter. Marcus looked toward him. Daniel gave a weak smile. I think tonight proves small moments become big scars. Across the aisle, Olivia Reed slowly closed her tablet. This entire country runs on invisible tests, she said quietly. Traffic stops, airport security, restaurants, banks, waiting rooms. Her eyes moved toward Rebecca, people deciding who looks trustworthy before a single word is spoken. Rebecca lowered her head again. There was no defense left, only consequences. But beneath the consequences sat something more uncomfortable, responsibility. Emily finally stepped forward carefully. Can I ask something? She said softly. Marcus nodded. Emily looked nervous. How do you keep staying calm when this keeps happening? That question changed the room again, because it was not legal, not political, human. Marcus smiled faintly, though sadness remained in it. I wasn't always calm. He folded his father's notebook closed gently. When I was younger, every insult felt like a fight I had to win. Every assumption felt personal. He paused. But anger can become a prison too. Emily listened closely. Marcus continued. So I learned something harder. I learned that staying human matters more than winning the argument. Rebecca looked at him in disbelief. After tonight, you still believe that? Marcus met her eyes directly. I believe people can do terrible things without becoming permanently terrible. The words broke something inside Rebecca completely. Tears slipped down her face now without resistance. Not theatrical tears. Not self-pity. Grief. Grief for the version of herself she had mistaken for professionalism all these years. Captain Mercer straightened slowly. We'll begin formal investigation procedures after landing, he said carefully. Corporate compliance, civil rights review, employee interviews, everything documented. Marcus nodded once. No shortcuts. No shortcuts, the captain repeated. Chloe finally lowered her live stream completely. The cabin noticed.
You stopping the stream?
Daniel asked quietly. Chloe looked around first class, at Emily, at Rebecca, at Marcus. Then she answered softly, I think people have seen enough humiliation for one night. Marcus gave her a small nod of appreciation. That mattered too. Not every moment needed to become entertainment. Outside, the aircraft crossed into Pennsylvania airspace. The seatbelt sign chimed softly as mild turbulence shook the cabin again. Glasses rattled lightly. A few passengers grabbed armrests instinctively. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Rebecca surprised everyone. She walked toward Emily slowly. Emily stiffened automatically. Rebecca stopped a few feet away. I made you afraid to speak honestly, she said quietly.
And that means I failed you too.
Emily blinked in surprise. Rebecca swallowed hard. You reminded me tonight of the employee I used to before this job became more important than people. Emily's eyes filled again. Not because everything was repaired, because accountability without excuses is rare. Kevin watched from the galley entrance, exhausted but relieved. For years, he had floated through conflicts trying to survive quietly. Tonight, he realized silence had cost more than risk ever did. Marcus looked around the cabin carefully. The atmosphere had changed completely now. Not lighter, not resolved, but honest. People were sitting straighter, speaking softer, looking at one another differently. Sometimes truth does that. It strips performance away until only character remains. Captain Mercer checked his watch. We begin descent into New York in about 40 minutes. No one reacted much. The flight no longer felt like transportation. It felt like judgment. Marcus finally picked up the steak Emily had brought him earlier. The butter had hardened from cooling. The potatoes were cold. He cut one small piece anyway. Rebecca watched him carefully.
You still going to eat it?
She asked softly. Marcus looked at the plate for a second before answering. It was never really about the meal. Then he took a bite. Not because the steak mattered, because dignity did. And somewhere over the dark, sleeping towns below them, an entire cabin finally understood the difference. The cabin lights dimmed as Flight 281 began its slow descent toward New York. Outside the windows, the black sky softened into scattered grids of orange and white below. Small towns appeared first, then highways, then the distant glow of the East Coast stretching beneath the clouds like veins of light across the dark. Inside first class, nobody looked relaxed anymore. The mood had changed too deeply for that. Passengers spoke quietly now. Some stared out windows pretending to think about something else. Others checked phones filled with headlines already spreading online. Skyworld passenger discrimination incident goes viral. Luxury airline under fire after first-class confrontation. CEO secretly boards own airline and exposes treatment of passengers. Rebecca saw the headlines too. Every notification felt like another door closing behind her. She sat alone near the rear galley again, no longer wearing the face of authority. The sharpness had disappeared from her posture. Her shoulders sagged slightly now, as though years of certainty had drained out of her all at once. Kevin handed her a cup of water quietly. She accepted it with shaking fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. Kevin leaned against the counter nearby. "You should probably prepare for media requests after landing." Rebecca laughed bitterly. "Media requests? They already know your name." That hit harder than she expected. Not because she feared reporters, because identity mattered to her. For decades, Rebecca Collins had built herself carefully. Senior flight attendant, professional, trusted, elite service specialist. She wore those titles like armor. Tonight, the armor cracked open in front of millions of people, and underneath it stood a woman forced to confront who she had become. Up front, Marcus remained calm, while Captain Mercer updated him quietly on operations messages. "The board is requesting an emergency conference call once we land," the captain said. Marcus nodded once. "And legal? They're worried about civil rights exposure." Marcus almost smiled at that. Interesting wording. The captain exhaled heavily. "You think they still don't understand?" "No," Marcus replied softly. "I think they understand perfectly. They're just afraid of liability more than culture." Captain Mercer looked down briefly. Because that was true too. Corporations often learn morality through financial consequences long before empathy arrived naturally. Emily approached carefully with fresh coffee. "Would you like another cup, sir?" Marcus looked up at her. "You don't have to call me sir every sentence." Emily smiled weakly. "Habit." Marcus accepted the coffee gently. "You handled yourself well tonight." Emily shook her head immediately. "I was terrified. That's why it mattered." She looked at him for a moment. "You really would stay quiet if nobody discovered who you were?" Marcus thought about the question before answering. "No." Emily waited. "But I would handle it differently." "How?" Marcus glanced around the cabin. "I would file reports, requested footage, forced investigations." His voice remained calm. "But the truth is, people listen faster when power speaks." Emily lowered her eyes. "That's unfair." "Yes," Marcus said softly.
It is.
Near row 2, Daniel Brooks watched the conversation quietly. For years, he believed success insulated people from humiliation. Tonight had destroyed that illusion. Money changed access. Influence changed visibility. But prejudice adapted. It simply wore more sophisticated clothes. His wife touched his hand again. "You've been quiet." Daniel nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about all the times I probably benefited from situations like this without noticing." She looked at him carefully. "You noticing now matters." Daniel stared toward Marcus. "No," he murmured. "Doing something about it matters." Across the aisle, Chloe Adams finally ended the live stream. The silence afterward felt strange. For hours, millions of strangers had occupied the cabin with them through screens. Their anger, their memories,
Their stories.
the internet had turned one airplane into a national conversation. Now only the actual passengers remained. Chloe rubbed her tired eyes. Olivia Reed looked toward her. You handled the coverage responsibly. Chloe gave a small shrug. I almost kept streaming, but you stopped. Chloe nodded slowly. There's a point where documentation becomes exploitation. She glanced toward Rebecca in the back. People still deserve humanity even when they fail publicly. Olivia studied her with quiet respect. That perspective was rare online now. Captain Mercer returned briefly to the cockpit for landing preparation. The cabin lights dimmed further. Seatbelt signs glowed overhead. A recorded voice announced their descent into Kennedy Airport. Passengers straightened instinctively. Belts clicked. Tray tables folded away. Ordinary landing routines. But nothing about the flight felt ordinary anymore. Rebecca finally stood again. Kevin looked up cautiously.
You okay?
No, she answered honestly. Then she walked slowly toward first class. Nobody stopped her this time. Passengers watched carefully as she approached Marcus again. The tension returned immediately, though quieter now, less explosive, more fragile. Rebecca stopped beside seat 1A. I spoke with my daughter, she said softly. Marcus looked up. She saw the videos already. Her voice shook. She asked me one question. Marcus waited. Rebecca swallowed hard. She asked whether I would treated a white man in a business suit the same way. Silence. Rebecca gave a faint, broken laugh, and I couldn't answer her. Marcus watched her carefully. Not cold, not warm, just present. Rebecca looked toward the floor. I think people imagine prejudice feels hateful all the time. Her eyes lifted slowly. But honestly, most of the time it feels normal, routine, efficient. She shook her head weakly. That's what scares me now. Emily listened from nearby. Those words mattered because monsters were easy to reject. Ordinary behavior was harder. Rebecca continued quietly. I kept telling myself I was maintaining standards, but somewhere along the way, I started confusing wealth with worth. Marcus leaned back slightly. That confusion diminishes more people than you realize. Rebecca nodded immediately. I know that now. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Marcus asked something unexpected.
Do you want to stay in this industry?
Rebecca looked startled. I doubt that decision belongs to me anymore. That wasn't my question. Rebecca hesitated, then answered truthfully. I used to love this job. Her eyes drifted across the cabin. The first time I flew as a child, I thought flight attendants looked like the world had become bigger than fear. A sad smile crossed her face. Somewhere over the years, I forgot the job was supposed to make people feel welcome. Marcus listened quietly. Rebecca looked directly at him. If I ever work again after this, I don't want to forget that anymore. Something softened slightly in Marcus's expression. Not absolution, but possibility. The aircraft tilted gently as it lined up for final approach. New York spread beneath them now in endless lights. Bridges shimmered over dark water. Traffic crawled like glowing veins through the city. Inside the cabin, people sat differently than they had at takeoff. More aware, more uncomfortable, more honest. Captain Mercer emerged from the cockpit one last time before landing. We'll be on the ground in about 15 minutes. Marcus nodded. The captain hesitated before speaking again. There will probably be media at the gate. Daniel Brooks muttered under his breath. Probably? A few tired laughs escaped the cabin. Small, human, necessary. Even Marcus smiled faintly. For the first time all night, the tension loosened just enough for people to breathe. Then Captain Mercer added quietly, corporate security also informed me federal transportation investigators may request immediate statements. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly. Consequences were no longer approaching. They were waiting. Emily looked toward Marcus carefully.
You nervous?
He thought for a moment. Yes, that surprised her. Marcus glanced out the window again, not about losing money or headlines. He paused softly. I'm nervous people will call this solved once one employee gets blamed. Emily understood immediately, because that was always the temptation. Find one villain, fire one person, protect the system. Marcus looked around the cabin one last time before landing. This only matters if people leave this plane seeing each other differently. No one answered. They did not need to. The city lights grew larger beneath them as the wheels lowered with a heavy mechanical sound under the floor. And somewhere inside that descending aircraft, every passenger understood they would remember this flight for the rest of their lives. The landing gear hit the runway with a hard, rolling thud, and for the first time in hours, nobody in first class spoke. The aircraft shook as it slowed across the wet pavement at Kennedy Airport. Outside, runway lights streaked past the windows in red, white, and blue. Inside, the cabin lights glowed low over faces that looked drained, alert, changed. Rebecca Collins gripped the edge of her jump seat. Her eyes were closed, not in prayer exactly, more like surrender. The tires roared beneath the floor. The engines reversed with a deep metallic growl. Phones began buzzing before the plane even left the runway. Messages, news alerts, missed calls, family members asking if they were on that flight, friends sending links to clips they had already seen. Chloe Adams looked at her screen and went still. "What is it?" Olivia Reed asked. Chloe swallowed. "The story's already on national news." Daniel Brooks leaned forward. "Already?" Chloe nodded. "They're calling it the Skyworld First Class Discrimination Incident." The words moved through the cabin like cold air. Marcus Bennett sat by the window, his seatbelt still fastened, his face calm but heavier now. He looked out at the terminal lights coming closer. Vehicles waited near the gate. Blue and red flashes reflected faintly off the glass. He had seen public crises before. Product failures, labor disputes, stock crashes, hostile negotiations. But this felt different. This was not a business problem. This was a human wound broadcast in real time. Captain Mercer's voice came over the intercom, lower than before. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we reach the gate. We appreciate your patience tonight." There was a pause, a small one. Then he added, "And on behalf of this crew, I want to acknowledge that what occurred on this flight was serious. Statements will be taken after arrival. Thank you for your cooperation." Rebecca opened her eyes. That was the first time the captain had not hidden behind soft language. No misunderstanding. No passenger issue. No service concern. Serious. She looked toward the front of the plane and felt the words settle over her shoulders. Serious meant paperwork, investigations, interviews, a record that could not be edited later. Serious meant her version would not be the only version. When the plane turned toward the gate, passengers in economy began craning their necks. They had heard pieces of the story during the flight. They had seen the whispers, the phones, the flight attendants moving with faces too tight for normal service. Now they knew something had happened. Something big. A man in row 12 whispered, "Is that the CEO up there?" A woman beside him answered, "I saw the video. That flight attendant is finished." But in first class, nobody celebrated. The mood was not victorious. It was sober. Emily stood near the front galley, hands folded in front of her uniform, eyes fixed on the floor. Her career had changed tonight, but not in a way that felt simple. Speaking up had not made her feel powerful. It made her feel exposed. Kevin stepped beside her. "You did good," he said quietly. Emily shook her head. "I should have done it sooner." Kevin looked down the aisle toward Marcus. "Most of us should have." That was the honest answer. The aircraft stopped at the gate with a final soft jolt. The seatbelt sign stayed lit. No one moved. Outside, through the left windows, passengers could see people gathering on the jet bridge side. Airport operations staff, corporate security, a woman in a dark blazer holding a folder. Two transportation officials with badges clipped to their jackets. Rebecca saw them and went pale. Kevin noticed. "Breathe," he said. She tried. It came out uneven. At the front, the cabin door opened. Cold airport air slipped into the plane, carrying the smell of jet fuel and rain. The quiet mechanical world outside suddenly felt very close. A Skyworld executive stepped aboard first. She was in her 50s, black, composed, and visibly exhausted. Her name was Angela Whitfield, general counsel for the airline. Marcus recognized her immediately. She had been part of the acquisition transition team. Her eyes found him. "Mr. Bennett," she said. The title rippled through the cabin one final time. A few economy passengers gasped softly. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. Angela's face held professional control, but her voice betrayed strain. We have federal transportation officials waiting. Corporate compliance is present. The board is requesting a statement before morning market open. Marcus nodded. Good. Angela seemed surprised by his calm. We also have media outside the secure area, I assumed, and legal exposure is substantial. Marcus looked toward Rebecca, then back to Angela. Then let's not begin by protecting ourselves. Angela hesitated. That was not the answer most executives gave. Marcus continued, voice low but clear enough for nearby passengers to hear. We begin by telling the truth. The cabin went still again. Angela studied him for a beat, then nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Rebecca stood when two transportation officials entered. One was a middle-aged man with gray hair and a careful expression. The other was a younger woman carrying a tablet. Rebecca Collins? The man asked. Rebecca's voice was barely audible. Yes, we need to speak with you regarding reports made during this flight and passenger treatment concerns. She nodded. No protest, no sharpness, no performance. As she moved forward, she passed Marcus. For a moment, she stopped. Their eyes met. I know this doesn't fix anything, she said quietly, but I meant what I said. Marcus looked at her for a long second. I hope you do something with that truth, he replied. Rebecca's face tightened with emotion. She nodded once and walked off the plane between the officials, no longer escorted as a ruler of the cabin, but as someone finally accountable to people beyond it. Passengers watched in silence. Then Daniel Brooks stood. I'll give a statement, he said to Angela, and I'll say I saw it from the beginning. Dr. Ethan Miller stood next.
So will I.
Olivia Reed lifted her tablet. I have written notes with times and direct quotes. Chloe raised her phone. I have video, but I'll provide only what investigators need. Not everything belongs online. Marcus looked at her with quiet approval. That matters. Chloe nodded.
So does restraint.
Emily stood frozen until Angela turned toward her.
Miss Parker?
Emily's shoulders tightened. Angela's voice softened. We'll need your statement as well. Emily glanced at Marcus. He gave her a small nod, not commanding, encouraging. Emily stepped forward. Yes, Mom. Her voice shook, but it held. As passengers began leaving the aircraft, many paused at Marcus's row. Some simply nodded. Others apologized for staying quiet. A few said nothing, but placed a hand briefly over their heart. Daniel was the last passenger from first class to approach him. I meant what I said, Daniel told him. I'm going to bring this into my company. Training, reporting, all of it. Marcus looked at him carefully. Don't do it because cameras were watching tonight. Daniel swallowed. I won't. Do it because someday they won't be. Daniel nodded, and this time he did not look away. When Marcus finally stepped into the jet bridge, the fluorescent lights felt harsh after the dim cabin. Rain tapped against the windows beyond the terminal walls. At the far end stood more executives, officials, and airport police managing the crowd. Angela walked beside him. What do you want the public statement to say? Marcus kept walking. That I experienced discrimination on my own airline. That the employee involved has been removed from duty pending investigation. That the captain's response will be reviewed. That every passenger and crew witness will be protected from retaliation. Angela typed quickly. And after that, Marcus stopped at the end of the jet bridge. Ahead, cameras waited. He looked back once through the aircraft door, where Emily stood beside Kevin in the galley, pale but steady. After that, he said, we rebuild the company around the people who were brave enough to tell the truth. Then Marcus Bennett stepped into the terminal lights, not as a passenger who had been humiliated, but as a leader carrying the burden of what that humiliation had revealed. And this time, everyone knew exactly who he was. By sunrise, the story had spread across every major network in America. The footage from Flight 281 played on televisions inside airport lounges, diners, hotel lobbies, retirement homes, and quiet suburban kitchens where older couples drank coffee before dawn. Millions of people watched Rebecca Collins deny a meal to a man she decided did not belong in first class. Millions watched Marcus Bennett remain calm while humiliation unfolded in front of him. But what stayed with people most was not the confrontation. It was the silence before anyone spoke up. That silence felt familiar. 3 days later, Skyworld Airlines headquarters in Manhattan looked less like a corporate tower and more like a courthouse. Reporters crowded the sidewalks outside. Satellite trucks lined the street. Protesters held signs demanding accountability. Former airline employees began sharing their own stories online. Patterns emerged quickly. Passengers questioned more aggressively based on appearance. Different standards of service. Complaints quietly dismissed. Employees discouraged from reporting discrimination if the customer seemed difficult. Marcus sat at the head of the executive conference table listening to testimony for almost 11 straight hours. No raised voice, no grand speeches, just facts. That was enough. Angela Whitfield stood beside a screen displaying internal reports collected over the past decade. Numbers, complaints, settlement agreements, training failures, employee warnings buried beneath performance reviews. This culture did not begin on one flight, she said carefully. Everyone in the room knew she was right. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. One older executive finally spoke. With respect, Marcus, every large company has isolated incidents. Marcus looked at him quietly. Then he slid a printed report across the table. 74 unresolved passenger discrimination complaints in 5 years. Not isolated, a pattern. The executive stopped talking. Marcus leaned back slowly. My father repaired buses in Chicago for 30 years, he said. You know what he used to tell me? His eyes moved around the room. People reveal their real values through what they tolerate repeatedly. Silence. No one defended the company after that. Meanwhile, Rebecca Collins sat alone inside a small apartment in Queens, watching her own face replay across television screens. Every network used the same clip. Not every passenger understands how premium dining works. Each replay felt uglier now. Not because strangers hated her, because she finally understood what the words carried underneath them. Her phone had not stopped ringing in days. Reporters, lawyers, former coworkers, family members. Half the messages condemned her. Some defended her angrily, calling her a victim of political correctness. Those messages disturbed her most because she recognized the thinking immediately. Excuse the behavior, protect the comfort, minimize the harm. The same cycle continuing again. Rebecca muted the television and stared at the silence in her apartment. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to remember moments she had buried beneath routine. A Latino family she once ignored longer than necessary because they seemed confused. A black businessman she asked twice for his boarding pass while white passengers walked by unquestioned. An older woman in cheap clothes she assumed belonged in economy until discovering she was a federal judge. Tiny moments, tiny cuts, thousands of them. Rebecca covered her face with both hands and cried harder than she had on the plane, not because she lost a career, because she realized how many people she had quietly taught to feel unwelcome in places they had every right to occupy. Across the country, Emily Parker's life had changed too. Corporate investigators interviewed her twice. National news programs requested appearances. Advocacy groups praised her online for speaking up. But Emily did not feel heroic. She felt tired. One evening, Marcus invited her into his office overlooking the Hudson River. The city lights reflected against the glass behind him, while ferries moved slowly through dark water below. Emily sat nervously across from him. You wanted to see me? Marcus nodded. On the desk sat a folder marked Sky World Cultural Reform Initiative. I'm restructuring passenger service training, he said. Not public relations, actual reform. Emily listened quietly. We are rebuilding hiring standards, reporting systems, escalation policies, anonymous employee protections, everything. He slid the folder toward her. I want you involved. Emily stared at him in disbelief. Sir, I've only worked here 3 years. Marcus smiled faintly. Exactly. She looked confused. Marcus folded his hands. Experience matters. But sometimes people stay inside broken systems so long they stop recognizing what's broken. Emily looked down at the folder slowly. You really think companies can change? Marcus took a long breath before answering. I think people can. And companies are made of people. That stayed with her. 6 months later, Skyworld Airlines looked different, not perfect, different. Monitored by training expanded beyond scripted videos. Passenger complaints became independently reviewed. Flight attendants received protections for reporting misconduct without retaliation. Diverse hiring increased across premium service divisions. Some employees resisted. Others welcomed it quietly, like people finally allowed to breathe honestly at work. Captain Andrew Mercer remained with the airline, but he changed too. During training seminars, he began speaking openly about professional silence. The worst mistake of my career, he told new crews once, was believing neutrality made me fair. That quote spread through the company faster than any memo. Daniel Brooks launched independent bias audits inside his real estate firms. Olivia Reed helped draft stronger reporting protections for transportation employees nationwide. Chloe Adams produced a documentary about invisible discrimination in luxury spaces. But she refused to turn Rebecca into a cartoon villain. People learn nothing from pretending prejudice. Only exists in monsters, she said during an interview. Sometimes it exists in ordinary routines people stop questioning. And Rebecca herself disappeared from public view for months. Then one quiet afternoon, Marcus received a handwritten letter at corporate headquarters. No lawyers, no media strategy, just paper. Rebecca wrote that she had started volunteering at a community travel assistance center in Queens, helping elderly passengers and immigrant families navigate airports and airline systems. At the bottom of the letter, she wrote one sentence. I spent years deciding who deserved comfort when I should have been protecting dignity instead. Marcus read the letter twice before placing it carefully inside his father's old notebook. That evening, he stood alone near the large windows of his office, watching planes cross the sunset above Manhattan, tiny silver shapes moving through orange light. Emily stepped quietly into the office behind him. You still think about that flight? Marcus smiled softly without turning around. Every day, Emily walked beside him. Outside, another Skyworld aircraft lifted into the sky. Different crew, different passengers, different choices waiting to be made inside that cabin. Marcus looked at the plane disappearing into clouds. Power doesn't matter if it only protects people who already have it, he said quietly. Emily nodded. And somewhere beyond the glass, thousands of strangers kept traveling toward places they hoped would welcome them without requiring proof they deserve basic respect. If this story stayed with you, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice, dignity, and real human courage. And in the comments, write these 3 words. Never stay silent.